It's just a couple minutes before 8. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Number one, I'm ready for spring. I hope you are. But welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Trauma-informed care is mentioned in ESSA, which is at the federal level. A lot of impact of the budget coming out March 15th. That trauma-informed care, basically they're calling it social-emotional learning, will be in the biennium budget that's coming out here next month. So it is focused across education. And the other thing is that I kind of told some of the leadership kids and the Interact kids at the high school, we had different CEOs of businesses come in and talk to them, and I'm in meetings with them all the time. They talk all the time about soft skills and about managing and being able to perform for the companies. And part of that is our initiatives with Leader in Me and what we're doing with trauma-informed care. As an educator, you can know your subject area, you can be an expert in it, but if you can't get through the stuff that we face with kids to get back to that where we have instructional strategies and student achievement, that can impact you as an educator. This is a part of that. I will tell you, in the state of Ohio, we have trained more than anyone in the state. We're not where we need to be. You can always get better with this topic, but in order to get to where we are with our expertise in our subject area or our grade level, we have to be able to manage this process. One thing that came to me, talking to Krista Miller over at Jacobs, they got to the point where they were doing so much with trauma, it was impacting them getting back to lessons. So they're out in the hall for 10 minutes with a kid while 19 other kids are in the classroom. That's a huge impact for us reaching efficiencies and being as efficient as we can as a school district. So we got to really work on those processes. A lot of that is what this meeting's about. Kind of reviewing a little bit, looking at our data that we've collected on our disciplines and on our habits as a district, and then we need your input today to move forward as a district to get better. And that's what we need to work together to make this process better. And with that, trauma-informed care is not going anywhere. Like I said, it's already mentioned at the federal level. The state is talking about it. It's been in campaign promises and across the state and across the nation because of what affects our schools. And with that, very important program this morning, I'll turn things over to Kelly and Darlene. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. The objectives are in your handout. You can read over those. We're just going to give a few reminders here at the minute. We really want to have fun today with you. We want everyone to be engaged. We're going to do activities. We may tell some stories, so keep confidentiality in mind. Please put your cell phones on silent or mute. And we will take an official break. However, we're all adults. You can use the restroom as needed. It won't bother Darlene and I. And as far as I know, all of the restrooms are downstairs on the ground floor. So like I said, we're going to do lots of activities today. And since there are about 170 of you and only 2 of us, we're going to need your help to get things back on track really quickly. And so to do that, if we yell Finley, you yell. Okay, but it has to be a yell. Okay, because that was more like a whisper. It has to be a yell. If we yell Trojans, you yell. And if we yell OH, you yell. IO is always the loudest, no matter what. It seems like IO is always the loudest. And then sometimes we may just count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that means we need to get everybody back together.
Good morning. So there's nothing like standing in front of a room full of people you really respect and have to present on a Monday morning. So let's celebrate who's here. Who's here with less than 5 years of experience? Raise your hands. Woohoo! And then 5 to 10 years? All right. And then 10 to 20 years? Awesome. And then more than 20 years. All right. Well, we're glad to have everyone here. So part of what's driving trauma-informed care is the data we collect in the district. So we have been collecting student perception data, and so this is the information that you can review later in the slides. This is information from 312, and then the next slide has information from, or it should have information from the high school.
So again, we've been collecting survey data, and the way that you read this survey, and again, it's in your handout, you will have the item, and then beside the item, you will have the ratings that people gave themselves. a 1 to 4, a 5 to 7, an 8 to 9, and 8 to 9 means I feel like I really understand that concept. So you have the survey results in your handout. We don't want to read those to you. We're going to let you devour that on your own time. But we do want to be very transparent with our data and give you an opportunity in your handout to look at all of the student perception data and all of the staff perception data. And again, we took this to determine how we feel we're doing as individuals with implementing a trauma-informed care approach. You know, we really have to sometimes just go out of our comfort zone to learn new things, and so we're really going to ask you to have a growth mindset today. We are going to have a lot of activities that involve you as an audience, and so to transform a culture, we really have to have a growth mindset.
So we're going to kick off with an inspiring video by Father Gregory. He started an organization called Homeboys, and we believe this is a great way to start our day today.
It's been the privilege. My alma mater, Gonzaga University, called me and said they were going to have a big talk on a Tuesday night with 1,000 people. And so I said, sure. And they said, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. I've never picked anybody more terrified of flying than this guy, Mario. He was just absolutely petrified. In fact, he was hyperventilating. And we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. And then our flight crew arrives, and I see 2 flight attendants, females, and they both have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the front steps. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. I should tell you that Mario, in our 30-year history at Homeboy, is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there. His arms are all sleeved out, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there's no doubt. And so I'd never been in public with him, and we're walking, and people are like this, and mothers are clutching their kids more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy on Monday and ask anybody there who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works there, they won't say me, they'll say Mario. He sells baked goods at the counter at our cafe. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So the nighttime talk comes, and it's 1,000 people, and I invite them up to share their stories in front of all these people for 5 minutes each. They were terrified, but they did a good job. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I invite them up for Q&A, and I said, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. Mario steps up to the microphone. He's a tall drink of water, skinny, and clutching the microphone, and he's terrified. Yes. And she says, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What advice do you give them? What wisdom do you impart to them? And Mario clutches his microphone, and he's just terrified, and he's trembling, and he's getting a hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. When finally he blurts out, and he stops, and he retreats back to his microphone clutching, terrified retreat. But he wants to get this whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed with emotion that this room full of people strangers had returned him to himself, and they were returned to themselves. And I think you go from here to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, and you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. Make those voices heard.
So today we're here because of all the Marios in our educational system in all of our lives. So we're starting out with this, and then we're going to get into strategies to help us as we have the Marios in our lives. But each one of us make a huge difference in all the Marios.
Even though we're spending a majority of our time today talking about trauma-informed care, we want you to keep in mind that we really need to use a multi-lens approach to assessing what our students really need. We need to consider what traumas they may have experienced, living in poverty, multiculturalism, their disabilities or developmental level. We need to really consider the whole child. When people ask us, what is trauma-informed care? It seems like there's a lot of misunderstandings. It's not a curriculum, and it's not just another new initiative, and you can't pull it out of a box, and you can't buy it off of Amazon. Trauma-informed care is really like a culture. It's who we are. It's how we do our everyday job. When schools come and they say, we want to see trauma-informed care, we're like, okay, well, what are you going to see? Well, you're going to see teachers interacting with students in a caring manner. So really what they're going to look at is how we do our everyday job. How caring are those interactions? That's what trauma-informed care is. Trauma-informed care is also about making sure that we have a Tier 1 PBIS system, a Tier 1 approach so that all students feel safe. What's the pyramid? I'm sure you recognize it. Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? So Tier 1 is making sure that physiological needs, safety needs, and belongingness are met.
So when you think of trauma-informed care, think of it as the umbrella over everything we do in Findlay City Schools, from the 7 habits, from teaching the whole child, to the implementation of PBIS. So what we're going to do, it's been a while since we've had the original trauma-informed care training, so we're going to take 30 seconds and take turns reading with someone at your table the core principles of trauma-informed care.
So you have your handout. You can continue to review the concepts throughout the training. The original trauma-informed care research project that was done in the mid-90s has been replicated many, many times in multiple states in our country. And one thing is true, no matter which test you look at, no matter which survey you read, one thing is true, trauma is very prevalent. You can bet at least 64% of the students in your room have experienced at least one form of trauma. The second finding is that there is a correlation between the number of forms of trauma a person experiences and the impact on their physical health, even dying up to 20 years early.
So we have taken, because we're doing so many great things in Findlay City Schools, different people have provided videos for today. So we have these FCS infomercials. So this is Danielle Myers as she talks about how trauma-informed care has impacted her practice.
Hi, my name is Danielle Myers and I work here at Findlay High School. I work within the Transition Eating Unit. I also work with students with specific learning disabilities. As a little bit of background about me, I've worked for 13 years now in different school districts, and I can tell you it does not matter what school district you work in. If you're working with students, you are working with students who have had some type of trauma. Trauma affects us all in so many different ways. It affects us in the way that we respond to stimuli. It affects us in the way that we have our social relationships, and it affects us especially within our academic areas. With that keeping in mind, I think that we do a great job at the elementary schools working with students who've had trauma. We have great support systems out there. We all come together to help those students. But we have to remember that those little kids, they grow up to be big kids. And we need to make sure that we are still as compassionate, as helpful, and are still giving them those services that they need. I'm very fortunate to be working with a group of students who wanted to be a part of our trauma-informed care video for you today. So today you're going to get a small glimpse of what my day looks like, and the majority and the vastness of the different ability levels and the trauma that have affected my students. Each student here is offered to take the ACE assessment. The ACE assessment is a quick 10-question survey that shows us the amount of traumas that a student may have gone through before the age of 18. They're all different types of trauma, so the number that you'll be hearing is the different types of trauma that they have actually gone through. I took it myself and I was a 3. Would you like to share yours, Hayden?
I was also 3.
I was a 2.
I was a 9.
I was a 6.
Trauma affects us all.
No matter how we look.
We all have a number.
What's yours?
So, we're not advocating that we gather ACE scores on our students. We can assume 70% of the population has experienced some sort of trauma, and it could be the night before coming to school. And that's the same for us in the room, which reminds me to say, please take care of yourself today. If somehow you get triggered because of your own trauma history, please take care of yourself as we're working through this PowerPoint. So, but the cost to trauma in our society is huge. It's in the billions of dollars. So it's a matter of when we as a society decide to address the impact of trauma on people's learning, their behavior, and their health. So why not now, when we have them in our clutches? So how many of you think our world's changing quickly? It's hard to keep up with it, right? So Kelly's going to be the old world, and I'm going to be the new world of how things have changed.
In the old world, Mom and Dad actually lived in the same house and they spent lots of time with their children.
Now, students stay with their parents, foster care, maybe they're couch surfing, homeless shelters, wherever they can find a place.
Back in the day, there were no cell phones. There was no such thing as Facebook or Instagram. And you know, we actually had face-to-face conversations.
Now, we communicate with our cell phones. Go to a restaurant, you can see the glow of everybody on their cell phone and having conversations. We're constantly having stimulus.
Back in the day, there was actually downtime. We got to rest and calm our brains and our bodies.
There's no time to calm down. We are constantly overscheduled, overbooked, and our brain and body tells us that. So we're going to take some time now, about 30 seconds, at your tables, come up with one old world and one new world, how things have changed. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Could we have one volunteer to share their new world? How have things changed? Yes, Matt.
The neighborhoods. Kids don't have, just leave the house in the morning and don't come back till dinner time. And that's when you build those relationships. You learn to deal with conflict, you learn to build friendships and adventures. Instead it's on an Xbox, communicating with friends.
Yeah, we're not having the face-to-face anymore, are we? So Matt talked about our neighborhoods are changing. Kids are no longer outside playing, building relationships, creating community.
That is so true. True or false? Thumbs up if you think it's true, thumbs down if you think it's false, and sideways if you really have no idea whatsoever. A hurting student's brain looks different from a student's brain who has been loved and cared for consistently. So I want to see thumbs in the air. I see some thumbs. Absolutely right. I see a lot of thumbs up. That is true. The one thing that is new is that we have a lot of science that can inform us about how trauma impacts the developing brain and body. We have PET scans and fMRI machines that really do reveal the differences. And so one of the results of our survey was that we still need some growth and understanding. So we're going to spend a short review on how trauma impacts the brain. First of all, we want you to know that the brain develops over time, and our students do not have a fully formed brain, a fully wired brain, until their mid-20s to upper 20s. It depends on which researcher you want to look at. Different areas of the brain control different functions, and the damage caused by trauma impacts the structure that is developing at that time. So whatever time frame, if it's a 2-year-old, whatever part of the brain is developing when the child is 2, if there's trauma then, that's the part of the brain that might have damage. Then whatever that part of the brain is responsible for, that part of the brain may not work right. So the student may not be able to function the way that we would perceive them being able to function. Students who have experienced a lot of trauma have an overdeveloped limbic system and an underdeveloped frontal lobe. The brainstem controls our basic life functions, the heartbeat, the breathing, the temperature control, our blood pressure. The cerebellum controls our posture, balance, equilibrium. So when I gave the example of like the 2-year-old that experiences trauma, the cerebellum's developing at that time. All of our kiddos that we see coming into preschool that have trouble with coordination, this may be one of the reasons why. And then we have that limbic system that we need to understand. The thalamus takes in all kinds of information from our surroundings, sights, sounds, smells. That comes into our hypothalamus, and it tells our endocrine system to secrete all kinds of hormones. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our breathing increases, the blood goes to our muscles, all because we need to get ready to fight or run, sometimes freeze. What's really interesting, the digestive system shuts off and the immune system shuts down. That's why so many of our kids have stomach problems. So many of the kids are in the nurse's clinic all the time, and they get sick a lot and miss a lot of school. When a student experiences trauma, it's almost like their limbic system switch gets turned on and it just stays on. They're constantly in that state of fight, flight, or freeze. The amygdala is a specific structure inside of that is our smoke detector. When that amygdala senses danger and it's very, very fast without thinking, it's unconscious, just all that sensory information enters that limbic system, and that amygdala will go off like a smoke detector, and at that point, no information is going to the cortex. The cortex is shut down. It is offline, which is why our students aren't able to think rationally. The other interesting thing here is when that cortex is shut down, the language center shuts down. When the language center shuts down, because the student's in fight or flight, they're not going to be able to rationalize or answer your questions. It's kind of like we're wasting our time asking them to explain their decisions when they're in that heightened mode. And the key here is to learn how to behave, we have to be able to think. And if we're constantly heightened and constantly in fight or flight, they have a hard time thinking about how to behave. And again, we have fMRI and PET scans to show us that the structure and function of the brain is different. I think you've seen these pictures before, the one on the upper right, the neglect, that is a 3-year-old Romanian orphan. Look how small the brain is. Now, with all that being said, there is a lot of hope. Neuroplasticity means that we can rewire a brain. We can, over time, heal a brain, but it does take time. It takes repeated positive experiences. So we're going to do an activity to help us understand how the brain works. And you're going to use this slide to help you in that activity. And this is how we're going to split up the room. On your table, you will see numbers. Table numbers 1 to 7. You are going to be the brainstem of this brain. Table numbers 8 to 17. You are going to be the limbic system of the brain. In tables number 18 to 22, you are the cortex of the brain. So basically, that side of the room is brainstem, the middle is limbic, and over here is the cortex. So here's what you're going to do. At your table, you are going to talk about your column only. And you're going to try to answer this question. And try to pretend right now like you're sitting in first period biology. And I'm your biology teacher. And I've just given you a group assignment to do. So in your groups, and you all know what the rules of my classroom are, in your groups, you're going to discuss what that part of the brain does and what behaviors you might see if that part of the brain were triggered. If the brainstem were in control, what behaviors might you see? If the limbic system were in control, what behaviors might you see? Etc. So we're going to give you a minute to start that conversation, and then we'll tell you what we're going to do next. Let's talk about the activity, dear group members. So let's review quickly. Brainstem, what's the major function? I'm not sure if I heard you. What's the major function of the brainstem? Basic life functions. If that part of the brain were in control, what might you see a student doing? Going to the bathroom all the time. In fact, maybe even having an accident. At the middle schools, some students still have accidents. Limbic system, what's the major function? Emotional regulation. If that part of the brain were in control, what behaviors might you see? Arguing, running around, crying, throwing newspapers. And if the cortex were in control, what might you see? Collecting the newspapers. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. You might see making decisions, right? Higher order thinking. So let's talk about what the newspaper, throwing the newspaper represents. Cortex. Once newspapers started coming your way, how easy was it for you to stay on task? You didn't? So let's think about the newspaper as a trigger. As the newspaper comes flying at you, does it derail you from the job? For most people, it's a yes. I will have to say, though, that I'm pretty sure that I saw somebody up here still doing the work. I was like, yes, there is someone who can ignore it all. And we do have those kids that no matter what comes their way, they seem to be able to stay on task. And then there are other kids that are totally derailed. And then there are other kids that when they get triggered, they have an accident and they wet their pants. Or there are kids here in the middle, when they get triggered, they'll scream and cry and yell and run around or go hide. So when a student is triggered, we're going to see a brain-based response. And these are some of the behaviors that you might be able to see in the classroom. And again, these behaviors are in your handout.
And then there's the physiological impact of what trauma does to people. So people who experience a lot of trauma can experience chronic pain. They can have stress-related memory issues, concentration, headaches, fatigue, and the list could just go on and on. And the slides with the little guy that says review with the hourglass, those are just for you to go back for your reference, but these slides are about that social and emotional impact of trauma exposure. And we see a lot of this, right? So what we know, the stress response system occurs, that fight, flight, or freeze, which impacts social and emotional development, which affects learning or behavior, and then it impacts learning. It's difficult for kids to learn in the classroom when they have all these things going on, but they can learn. Today's about they can learn. So there's a lot of whys. So why trauma-informed care? Here's a list of the top 20 that we brainstormed. There's many beyond this, but there's a lot of good reasons of why we need to be trauma-informed care. So as we've been implementing this for Findlay City Schools, we've had a lot of lessons we've learned. One, that there's no quick fix. We can work and work, and it feels like sometimes the student's not making growth in these areas, but we believe that we are making a difference. And then it takes a long time to heal from trauma and exposure, especially when our kids are going home to environments that are not necessarily conducive to healing. And that our idea of just get over it does not work.
So it really is time for a paradigm shift. What do we believe about our students, their parents, poverty, behaviors, capacity to learn? We need to shift our focus. So Darlene and I are going to play off each other, and I'm going to SNL this up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to dramatize it. I'm going to be old traditional, and Darlene's going to be new trauma-informed. And so again, we're going to try to play off each other, and just know that I'm exaggerating things. I'm going back to my original days of teaching like 30 years ago, okay? So back in the day, I was hired to teach curriculum. That's what I was hired to do.
Oh, Kelly. We're now teaching self-care, how to build and maintain relationships on top of teaching the curriculum.
Students should be able to adjust to change. If we have a substitute or not, why would they act any different? I adjust easily to change. Not really, but
We really need to communicate with students before change. Changes may trigger stress responses. When we communicate change, we're proactively addressing that.
oh my gosh, I played the blame game. Poverty, the drug crisis, parents.
We focus on the things we can control. We do no longer blame.
You know what? No matter what, I will always one up my students. I cannot lose.
We need to focus on win-wins, not win-loses.
These kids, they just need to snap out of it.
But the emotional part of the brain constantly being triggered, that brain stays on. It takes time to heal and learn replacement skills and to build resiliency.
You know, the other day I was walking down the hall and I saw these kids doing some things that they shouldn't have been doing. Not my student, so I just kept on walking.
Every student is my student. If not us, then who? So the next section of the presentation, we have divided into sections, and it's based on strategies and approaches we can use as we're trauma-informed. So the first section is how do we proactively approach the trauma exposures our students face. And really, guys, the first thing is each one of us in this room. What are our mindsets? What are our beliefs? What are our attitudes? And then what are our behaviors? How does this play out in our interactions of what we do every day? So a lot of trauma-informed care is taking a mirror and taking a good hard look at ourselves and how we're practicing what we do every day. It's about having knowledge, and when we have that knowledge, it can change our heart so we can look at ourselves and make those changes if necessary.
What we need to look at is our disposition. What is our trauma-informed disposition? So a disposition is like our collection of attitudes and beliefs and that they are student-centered and empathetic. It's truly believing that kids can heal and be resilient. It's being respectful and patient. It's about avoiding battles with students because that's a lose-lose. And it's about being aware of ourselves.
And we need to look at our nonverbal skills. Our nonverbal skills communicate so much, and students can perceive that as being aggressive. So what is our body position? What are our nonverbals? Do we have appropriate eye contact for the student and the culture in which they're coming from? And are we recognizing personal space when we're communicating with some people? Because for some people, personal space, we get in their personal space, it can become a trigger, being aware of that.
So we're going to do a little activity, and Darlene and I are going to kind of demonstrate this. So it's kind of like one of those we do, you do kinds of things. So the first thing we're going to do is decide who your partner is, and Darlene and I are partners A and B. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to stand approximately 3 feet apart. And then she is going to walk towards me until I'm uncomfortable, and I'm going to put my hand up, and she's going to not get in my space any more than that. Okay? Now, once she's there, I put my hand up and she stops, she's going to start giving me a little body language lecture. Okay? And I'm going to think about how that makes me feel. And then what she's going to do, after I think about how it makes me feel, she's going to step back kind of to the side and basically kind of get out of my space. She's no longer physically in front of me. And she's going to smile at me, and I'm going to think about how that makes me feel. And then we're going to switch and repeat. So obviously you can't do this seated. You need to stand up. Partner A, partner B. You can also, if you're with a 3, you can do it that way. But try to do it as quickly as possible. Directions are on the slide.
Infamous Seinfeld post-talk show. Right. I don't either, so we're going I'm uncomfortable. Back away.
Hey, don't forget to switch. Okay, Trojan. Do you remember that one's true? Trojan. Yes. Okay. I do have to say I saw something really funny. Someone was trying to do the scolding part, and they were smiling at the same time. They kind of took it to a different level. That was hilarious. Okay, now we're going to do a quick debrief.
So, what did you notice? When the person was in your face, what did you notice? He was really in your personal space. We need one response.
Did you like it?
Yeah. Did anybody feel uncomfortable? You want to push it back like Kelly did myself? Yes.
So, what factors would impact the size of someone's bubble? What would impact that? I actually have a really small bubble, to be honest. I don't get too wigged out by people in my space. But what would impact the size of your bubble? Confidence. Oh, that's a good one. Would gender, the size of the other person, your age, your past trauma? There's all kinds of things that would impact the size of someone's bubble.
So how did it feel when the person took a step back and then stood at an angle? Did anybody feel a little more relaxed, a little more receptive? Anything else?
Maybe less threatened.
Less threatened? Could think better?
So how does this relate to interacting with our students? So if I come up over someone's shoulder from behind, because that's what really good caring teachers do, we try to help at their desk, and I completely get it. what else would you do? If I don't know this student and I lean over and get in their bubble, that could maybe not go so well. It's just something to always keep in mind for every student, that proximity. So again, TIC starts with you. It's all about our tone. How we say something is just as important as what we say. In fact, how we say it is even more. And we cannot ever let a student see that we're taking it personally. Our facial expression, our eyebrows, how we cross our arms, they're going to read that body language and they're going to interpret whether they're safe or not. So now we're going to kind of repeat that activity a little bit. Person A, person B. Now we're going to look at the disposition or mood of the educator. So B is going to be the student, and they're going to stand with their back to the screen. And I am the teacher, and I am facing the student. So I am going to read what's on the screen, and I'm going to act it out. Okay? The next screen will give you what you're acting out. So I'm acting something out towards that student. Example, I might say sit in your seat or open up your book and answer the first 5 questions. Those are examples. But I'm going to say it with a mood. I'm going to say it with a disposition. And then the student's going to try to guess what mood I'm in. Okay, so you got to try to be good actors. Don't smile while you're in your mood. And then we'll tell you to switch. So you need to get up and get in position first, because once we flip the screen, then you'll know what mood you're portraying. So you don't want the student seeing the screen.
No cheating.
No cheating. No cheating. Student faces the screen. Adult, wait, student back to screen. Okay, so teachers, act this out. Students, see if you can guess what it is. Try to act it out. So after you have acted it out, the student is supposed to guess the answers on the screen, and there are some questions to think about. OH! Okay, so we need everybody to kind of stop part 1. Now we're going to ask you to switch places. Student becomes teacher, teacher becomes student. As soon as you're in place, we'll switch the screen.
So the mood is on the screen. Act out your mood, teachers. So again, we can, the students read us educators' moods, how we're interacting with them, and how do our interactions with them make them feel. Are they feeling safe? Are they feeling like they want to be engaged? So we all have our good days and bad days as educators. educators, right? But we really have the freedom to choose how we respond to students and our environment and everything we have going on in education. We have that freedom and that power to choose. So we can either look at things as a problem, which creates negative emotions, or we can look at problems as opportunities, which creates a more positive emotion and creates space for us to move forward with it. It keeps us in a better place so we can choose how we respond.
And then we have something called mirror neurons, and this is true science. Some researchers in Italy were looking at how the brain works, and basically if I'm interacting with someone, the part of my brain that lights up based upon my feelings at the time will eventually light up the same part of the brain in the other person. Now that is a short definition of mirror neurons, but that old adage that emotions are contagious, that's really true. If I'm in a bad mood and I'm interacting with someone, eventually they're going to catch it. And that is why every interaction truly does matter. Every interaction matters. We can either calm a child down or we can escalate the child based upon how we're responding in the situation. So now we have a little infomercial from Kelly Cheney and Lauren Perriott. And I have no idea why that did that. There we go.
So trauma-informed care is, some people are really lucky to kind of start their career just knowing what to do and knowing how important it is. And other people have to have kind of that moment, I think. I wasn't lucky enough to have begun my career that way, I guess, but I had an intense moment where I realized how much a relationship matters and how much I need to get involved in their lives and understand what they're going through. So that's where I came from.
I think that relationships have always been super important, but I wasn't sure how to balance that with all of the things that I needed to do. So I felt every time that I focused on relationship building, I felt like I was missing out on the stuff I was supposed to be doing. So then we kind of joined a little bit, and Lauren brought her this journal idea to our class when we started co-teaching, where we give 20 minutes on Monday and 20 minutes on Friday of journal time. And it started off as a good sustained writing practice, and it turned into, I think, insight into every single one of our students, that we make sure that we prioritize every single week, no matter what. That's the last thing to go, is journal. It opens up communication for our students to us, and we can communicate back sometimes on things that kids don't want us saying out loud, that we can kind of write to them through journal.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't know what we're going to get, and maybe once or twice a year we find something really amazing that we needed to know to help teach these kids, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but it would have been 0 times if we didn't have the journals and those open conversations. I think they feel like we know them better. I definitely feel like we know them better. So that's just one thing. We also have, we call it our family. You know, when you come into our room, you're our family. You're safe here, you're welcome here. It doesn't matter who you already belong. Middle school especially is hard. I mean, all of the ages are hard for some reason, but in middle school, we find that a lot of kids struggle with belonging to a group. So we have a little saying there right on the wall when they walk in, and we talk about at the beginning of the year that you belong here already. You don't have to try, you don't have to fit in, just who you are is good enough. So we just base everything that we do on that.
Yeah, and we find then that the rest of the class then sticks up for each other a little bit, making sure that they all know that they belong, even if maybe someone is sort of slipping away a little bit. They kind of work to bring each other back. And I think that it helps then for us to be able to share with other teachers things that maybe they don't get a chance to learn in math or social studies or science, that we can use from things that we do with writing, or discussion even, that we can pass that on to the other teachers as well.
It doesn't happen right away. I mean, one sign next to the door doesn't mean the moment they come in, it's just like a light switch. So some kids, we say we haven't got them yet, and we'll get 3/4 of the way through the year before we feel like we've got them, but it always happens. Eventually, they always come over to our side, like where they feel like we care about them and we know them and they can be themselves. So you see those barriers kind of fall down, and they're a changed student.
I think one of the things that really proves it to them is that our treatment of them never once changes, even if they have bad days. They don't have to earn our good treatment. They get our best treatment all the time, whether they have an attitude or talk back or are terribly disrespectful or rude or anything. They are always going to get worthy treatment as a human being.
Fresh off suspension, I'm glad you're back. So I guess that's just kind of what we do. It doesn't take any work anymore. That's just what we do.
So how does it impact? So Kelly and Lauren do a really good job of demonstrating unconditional positive regard, meaning no matter what happens with the student, we're happy to be with them, we're happy to work with them. They are feeling that we are accepting them, who they are in that moment, so we can go forward with that. So really, with that trauma-informed care lens, we're no longer asking what's wrong with you. We're asking, what's happened to you and how can I help and support you so you can be the best human being possible in this moment, and then you can be productive adult citizens who have grit and determination. And again, caring relationships matter. They're enormously essential. No development's going to occur unless we have really good relationships with our students. That's the big takeaway from this slide.
So now we're going to have a 1-minute table talk. While the volunteers that Darlene found earlier come up front, please. So while the volunteers are remembering what it is they're going to do in this activity, we're going to role play for you here in a minute. At your tables, we want you to discuss all of the really awesome strategies you have used to build positive relationships with students, especially the students who have challenged you the most. So I know that everyone in here can think about a student who's challenged them and how hard you work to build a relationship. So please start your 1-minute talk.
We do this thing called 5 over the weekend.
Our role play people are ready. So, Finley, Trojans. Finley, Trojans. Okay, so if we could have your full, undivided attention up here for this activity, please. This activity will be done in silence, except for Darlene.
So dad left, parents are divorcing. Mom goes to jail. Student moves in with grandparents. Grandpa dies, changes schools, loses friends. Moves in with aunt, changes schools again. Made a new friend, friends post rumors on social media that are harmful. So in working with our parents, our guardians, our grandparents, our foster parents, our students, our colleagues, what are the first things we need to do is seek to understand what people have going on in their lives. We have jobs to do. We don't stop doing our jobs, but seeking to understand so that we can respond appropriately. So when you think about empathy, for me, trauma-informed care has changed me because I will often say, if I was born with the student's same genetics, brought up in the same home, had their same life experiences, would I behave any differently from what they're behaving right now? And as much as I don't want to admit it, I would behave the same way. Because we can't help it, we're human beings, it's what we do. So having empathy is so huge when we're trauma-informed. And we need to give respect so we get respect. We're modeling respect with our students. And trust, so many of our students cannot trust. So it takes forever to build trust, and we're building that with those relationships we have with students. And we need to assume that everyone is doing the best they can with the awareness they have at the time, whether it's our students, our families, or the people we're working with.
So we have a strategy that you can use to work on building those relationships. And we're going to use an acronym to remember it. You might have a quiz on this later. Daily greetings earns trust. The E stands for eye contact. The A stands for acknowledge the student's presence. The R, show respect. The N, use their name. And the S, smile. Now granted, that is super easy and you probably do all of that on a regular basis. However, can we say that we do that on a regular basis with our most challenging students? So greetings earns trust. So now we have a little infomercial. So let's say that you try to greet students at the door every day, and because you have all these questions, it's just kind of tough to be the greeter. Well, at Washington Preschool, they came up with a solution, and this is about the cutest thing I've ever seen. Don't you love his face? It's adorable. So what you can see there is that the student did the work for the teacher, and the student approaching the door got to choose how they wanted to be greeted. They got to choose. Whether they wanted a hug or not, or a high five, or a smile, they got to choose. How wonderful is that? These are our preschool leaders. So impressive. Another intervention that you can use is called the one-sentence intervention. So think of this as like a check-in, check-out process. Identify 6 unique things to that student values a lot. Pay attention to them. What do they talk about? What do they value? Step 2, write down at least 6 different things that student values, and say it in the form of, I noticed that. You're not placing a judgment. I noticed. I noticed that you love Fortnite. You're going to come up with 6 things, and you're going to share 2 of those sentences with them for 3 weeks, every day. At the end of the 3 weeks, evaluate if your relationship has improved. The one-sentence intervention. I noticed that, whatever it is. I noticed that you love Converse. I noticed that you love gaming. I noticed that you love dogs, whatever it is.
And, avoiding the use of general praise. So we can say things like, it sounds so elementary when we're talking about this, but we want to cover it. But, great, being specific in our praises. Great job in staying in your seat today. Thank you for talking quietly during that activity. And then the next slide is, again, just examples of ways that we can reinforce positive behavior. I so appreciate that you, and fill in the blank, instead of using the same statements we always say. So it's really important that we ask questions, actively listen, and then paraphrase so that we can understand that we're truly understanding the students. So a lot of times we say, how was your day, right? And we get that packed answer. So with a partner, take 30 seconds and share questions you can ask the students to build positive relationships and initiate conversations. So you have 30 seconds. 5 are just questions that you can use as a resource to help you think of ways to ask questions like, how were you brave today versus how was your day? How did you make a difference to someone today instead of how was your day? Another strategy, and if you've never read the book, I highly encourage you to read it because it really does help with your personal relationships in your life. How many of you are familiar with love languages? Okay, so we really need to know what our students' love language is. So let's give some examples. Thumbs up if you think this is a good thing for you. Now you're going to have to put yourself in this situation. Thumbs up if you like it. Thumbs down if you would hate it. And sideways if you just really don't care. So what if a supervisor found a mistake in your work and pointed it out to you? Would that be a thumbs down, a thumbs up, or you really wouldn't care? You need to see some thumbs. Would you agree that we're seeing mixed thumbs? What's good for one may not be good for another. The next one, supervisor praises you publicly, has you come up at the staff meeting. Some of you have thumbs up, some thumbs down. What about a supervisor gives you a pat on the back? Literally, gives you a pat on the back. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Now, let's look at the student version of that, right? I will do often what I think I love because I think everyone will love it. So if I love being praised publicly, I might tend to praise my students publicly because if I love it, surely they love it too. But again, we need to know their love language. So student version, teacher found a mistake and pointed it out in front of the class. Student version, teacher praises student publicly. Student version, teacher gives the student a pat on the back in front of their classmates, literally a pat on the back. Those students may not have our love language. We need to know what makes them feel cared for. Love language is a strategy. We also need, from a tier 1 perspective, think about safety from a different perspective. Typically we think of safety, we think of physical safety, right? But we also need to consider social emotional safety as far as relationships between the kids and the adults and their friends. Academic safety in the classroom, is it okay for them to take academic risks and make mistakes to create this environment of safety? And then when you think about teaching expectations and rules, think PBIS, having safe and predictable environments that are structured so they understand all the rules that they need to follow, and being consistent with those rules at all times so it does not create confusion. So knowledge is power. Part of the thing for the students, like we're the adults, we're in control, but somehow students need to perceive that they also feel in control. So it's really important for us to be predictable. Especially like at the middle school and high school level, when you think about the number of different environments they're visiting, and each environment or each classroom has different rules and expectations, and the kids have to balance all of that. So just being aware of that, and how can we align with some of that. And then, and we need to be able to explain the rules to the students in a way they understand, because if we can't understand the rule, why do we have the rule? So let's take 30 seconds and pick one of these areas on the slide, one of these 5, and talk about the rationale for the rule and how you would explain that to students in a kid-friendly way. So you have 30 seconds. You can pick 2 if you have time for 2.
Oh, no.
When you're not being chosen, like you're being on it. Being on it.
General.
Let's go ahead and let's come back. Thank you for doing that activity. So again, we're
we're talking about strategies. We just went over the strategy of being able to explain our rules. Now, another strategy is being able to teach how the brain works. How can we weave it into lessons? No matter what subject area, social studies, language, art, science, how can we weave it into our lessons? We also need to teach the impact of trauma and stress on the body. We can talk about characters in a book, for example, or historical figures. What was the impact of trauma and stress on them? We also need to teach the cognitive triangle. Now again, when we teach these concepts, we teach them proactively. We're in that proactive section. When a circumstance happens, what do I think about it? My thoughts create my feelings, then my feelings create my behaviors. What were my thoughts about that circumstance? How did I feel? What did I do?
Another strategy is for us to be able to identify students' triggers and help them manage them. There can be external triggers or internal triggers, but we become aware of that because if we can help the students identify their triggers, then we can proactively address what happens after that. And we really want to avoid re-traumatizing students and triggering students. For instance, if we have a lot of win-lose battles with them, or sometimes even though we have educator voices, our educator voices may be a trigger to a student, and that's something you know about your own students, if that would happen or not. And then again, being aware of our body language. The next section is on proactive and response strategies as we move forward. So whenever we're having strategies, we need to consider the developmental level of the student rather than their age or their grade level. Some students will regress to much younger ages, so we need to consider that in our strategies when we're working to calm students down.
So for example, calming the brain. We can give this space and time to calm down. We can just have them go get a drink of water. We can allow them to get some physical exercise. We can also create what we call a recovery and re-engage spot in a classroom, and we'll talk more about that R&R spot later. We can also create sensory rooms. And there's a lot to celebrate. We're going to show some slides with some pictures. There's a lot to celebrate about our school environments and how they've transformed.
This is a science classroom where a teacher took it and added some furniture to make it a little more cozy. So whenever we use our strategies, these calming tools, we need to have rules around these. This is not a free-for-all. We need to provide structure. We need to provide the rules for what's okay and what's not okay when we're using these calming tools. So Jill Leatherman has created an FCS infomercial for us on how she uses mindfulness in the classroom. Jill is an 8th grade math teacher.
Hi, I'm Jill Leatherman, and I teach 8th grade math at Donnell Middle School. We started mindfulness at the very beginning of the year, and the kids love it. Math isn't always everyone's favorite, and some people can get really stressed about it. When Mrs. Matt comes in and does mindfulness, they are able to, there's just a true calming in the room, and they're able to refocus and concentrate on one thing at a time. It is something that the kids even come in asking for. They ask, is it Mindfulness Monday? Or anyway, Mrs. Matt can come up today? And if they can't, then they'll ask me to well, can you play something? Can you do something? So there's some really good sites and there's some really good things that you can do. We have tried progressive relaxation. We've tried guided imagery. That's maybe one of the favorites. I don't know if there's a beach scene behind me or what there is right now, but they've done that where they get to put all their problems in a boat and watch it sail away. So it really does, you can tell the kids are way more focused and they're actually excited for some math.
So Jill doesn't know, that was a green screen. We just threw images on there. She doesn't know that it looks that way yet.
So we're going to talk about how you can teach and model emotional regulation and how we can use those strategies. With that being said, there is a certain amount of training that should occur because if we implement these strategies, we could inadvertently harm students if we're not implementing them in a healthy way. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those strategies. So, and one of the things about these strategies is that we're teaching students that these are things within their circle of control. There's things in their lives that they don't have, there's a lot of things in their lives they don't have control of, but we can certainly teach them to learn to regulate themselves and their emotions and the choices they make. Kelly, click. So, there's a lot of research behind mindfulness and the use of mindfulness in the classroom, less depression, higher rates of concentration and learning, better sleep quality, all wins, right? But the one I really like is when kids practice mindfulness, they're less prone to emotional outbursts and behavioral outbursts. It's huge, right? If we can keep them in the thinking part of the brain, think how much education we can get done. So here's some just strategies that if we practice it, we need to have it built into our day. We need to make sure the rooms are safe if we're doing mindfulness. Not only physically safe, but psychologically safe. So we're going to practice some of these techniques. So this will not be painful. So we are going to start with some breathing and why it's important, why the breath can be so powerful. There's a nerve that goes down through the center of the body called the vagus nerve. And when we take deep breaths, it sends a message to the brain for the brain to calm down. So just the very act of good, deep breathing can help students feel calmer. So we're going to practice that. So I'm going to ask you all to sit up, straighten your chairs, flat on the floor. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes so you're not distracted by other students in the classroom. And we're just going to begin, and we're going to do a deep breath, but it's going to be a concentrated deep breath, meaning when we breathe in, we want to put our hands on our stomachs and we're going to feel our stomach go out. And then when we breathe out, we're going to have our stomach go in. It's much like we're inflating and deflating a balloon. So, let's go ahead, let's breathe in through our nose. And we're going to hold it. And then we're going to breathe out. And we're going to hold it. You're going to breathe in through your nose. And you're going to hold it. And then you're going to breathe out through your mouth. And hold that. Okay, very good, guys. Did you notice the room got really quiet? You should hear what happens in classrooms. It's pretty amazing. Something else you can do is called progressive relaxation. Progressive relaxation is when we tighten different muscle groups in our bodies and then we release them because we hold a lot of stress and anxiety in our muscles in our bodies. So, and you can use a rating scale to help kids learn to identify where they're at. But you can use a scale from 1 to 10, or you can even high school and middle school kids, you could use colors or animals, things they like. So we're going to practice a little a Cliff Note version of progressive relaxation. So we're, again, going to sit up, straighten our chairs, feet flat on the floor, and we're going to close our eyes. And we're just going to begin, we're going to tighten all the muscles in our feet like fist. Tighten them and squeeze them tight. And then relax them. And then we're going to tighten all the muscles in your legs. And then relax them. And then you're take your hands and make them into fists. And then relax them. And then you're going to squeeze your arms and your shoulders. Take all your muscles in your arms and your shoulders. And relax them. And then we're going to have a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And now we're going to combine all of the muscle tightenings. So we're going to start with your feet. Hold your feet tight, like a fist. Your legs, your hands, your shoulders, your arms. Every muscle in your body is tight. Hold it, and then relax it. And take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And go ahead and open your eyes and come back to the room. These are little things we can do, say before a test. Mrs. Leatherman uses this before a test because she wants her kids to be in the thinking part of her brain and not in that emotional part of the brain where they may have test anxiety. Little things we can do to teach kids how to calm themselves down, and it takes a short amount of time. Yoga is also used in the classroom. to help students learn to self-regulate and become aware. So let's take 30 seconds and answer the questions on the slide at your table.
Exercise video.
What I failed to mention, while we're practicing mindfulness and calming down techniques with the students in the classroom, it has two benefits. One to the student, the other one is to us, the educator.
Absolutely, I feel calmer. So again, we're talking about strategies. And I know that many of you done this because I've witnessed it. But give student a job. Give them a job to do. Whenever you notice that he or she is near the breaking point, have a plan in place ahead of time so that you've got an agreement with another teacher, have the student do an errand or whatever you feel safe that student doing. And then the student will go and do that errand. It gives them a chance to take a walk, get a quick drink, and come back. Again, I've seen that in action, and you have to choose carefully. You have to know your students before you use some of these strategies. Another strategy, visual cues. This works with students that you may have never thought of trying this with. Regardless of whether they're elementary, middle, or high school, depending upon their developmental level, or their likes or dislikes, you can use visual cues to get them to stay quiet. The one on the right was visual cues that a student, middle school student, developed to prevent herself from running out of a classroom. You can also use think sheets. You can develop your own think sheets. You can go on Teacher Pay Teacher and find think sheets to get students to problem solve whatever behavior it is that is interfering with learning.
So the next section we're going to address is proactive and response communication strategies, because communication is a big part in building these relationships and not escalating students. So we can do things like using encouragers to create space when students are talking that we're really listening or someone's talking, because sometimes we're really thinking about what we want to respond back, but we just need to create space. We can do things like, okay, and then those pregnant pauses where they have time to add on to the conversation. We can also use closed and open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are going to give you a lot of information. Like, can you tell me more about what's been going on? But the closed-ended questions were, do you want to go to recess or not? You know, you can determine how much information you're getting from the kids by the questions you ask. So we're going to do an activity called Say It With Attitude. So you're going to pick a partner, or you can have a triad if you need a triad. And person A is going to say to person B, and we really want you to have attitude, like you're really having a bad day. You're going to say, why did you poke Shane with a pencil? So let's go ahead and let's do that.
Why did you poke Shane with a
Okay, so now we're going to switch it. I heard some really good comments there. That was awesome. So the person B is going to say to A, so when we're saying those statements with attitude, how can the student interpret that? How can the student interpret that? When we use words like why and you, we're not saying never use them, there are appropriate uses for them, but often when we use why and you, and we say it with attitude, it's a barrier to building relationships. It helps people feel defensive. Maybe it's communicating what's wrong with you, and it's communicating adult frustration or criticism. So one of the things when we go back to the cognitive triangle, we can help students reframe their thoughts. We can give them affirmation statements that help them reframe what they're thinking, which will affect their behavior in the long run. So these are just examples for you guys to use as a resource later. Like, I can control my emotions. That is a really good affirmation for some kids. So just like we use differentiated curriculum for students, we can also have differentiated ways that we respond to behaviors depending upon the student and their developmental level. And remember, fair does not always mean equal. So now we're going to have a little quiz on the greeting earns trust. What did the A stand for? The E. What did the E stand for? Eye contact. A. Acknowledge. R. Respect. N. Name. S. Smile. Okay, so I want you to think of a challenging student. Get their face in your head right now. Think about who he or she is. And I want you to practice with a partner using the earns trust, but use one of your I noticed that. Use one of your one-sentence interventions with your partner, because again, you're building relationships with a challenging student. Take 30 seconds and go ahead and do that with a partner. By the end of today, I want this room yelling out the answer. Lots of energy, lots of energy. So, example, I noticed that you love animals, especially horses. Again, just a simple I noticed. You're not judging it good or bad, just I noticed. Now we're going to talk about response strategies. Everything from here on out are ideas that we can use to respond to challenging behaviors. We talked about proactive strategies, strategies that you can use proactively and in response, and now we're talking about response. True or false? Discipline is soft in a trauma-informed school. Thumbs up, sideways, don't know, thumbs down. What do you think? Ooh, I don't see some thumbs. People are kind of curious. Not really sure, maybe. So let's talk about that. False. Discipline is not soft in a trauma-informed school. We just need to talk about what discipline looks like in a trauma-informed school. You know what? There are consequences for every one of our choices, whether it's good or bad. The thing to remember is that discipline means to teach. It's not about punishing kids to make them hurt. They may not learn from that, and it's very rarely a good deterrent. This is about building skills so that kids can change the behaviors. One of those perspective changes. This is not about rescuing kids or coddling kids. We do not want them to feel weak. We want them to know that we believe they are resilient. This is not about making excuses for kids or lowering our standards. We don't want them to feel like a victim. If they feel like a victim, they'll just make a lot of excuses and never own their behaviors. So we don't want them playing the blame game. We don't want to play the blame game. So we have to have a paradigm shift about what we think about school discipline, what the focus is. Every behavior concern is an opportunity for learning. Now, I've sat in a classroom, I've been an assistant principal, and I know how hard this is, and you know that we've been in your shoes. So we're not saying this is easy. Discipline is not easy. But every behavior problem is an opportunity for the student to learn and for us to learn. And both of us, the students and ourselves, we all need to take responsibility for what happened in every situation. So again, we're going to do paradigm shift. I'm going to role play what it used to be like back in the day when I first started teaching. Darlene is going to do the new trauma-informed thought process. So the first one, every one of these behaviors, they are choice behaviors. Students want to do well, but they lack the skills. We need to work with them to develop the skills.
Students should know and follow the rules automatically. When I went to school, I could follow all the rules.
We need to clearly teach the expectations.
You know, some of these behaviors, and this is true, really make me angry. And sometimes I'm hurting, kid can hurt a little bit too.
We need to consider the consequent model. Discipline means to teach new behaviors. We need to avoid power struggles.
Old school. Used to get pulled into arguments because you know what? I had to convince them what the right thing was. I had to convince them.
I need to recognize when my buttons are pushed. I need to stop and set limits, and again, avoid power struggles.
Sometimes I just went on and on and on, just like I did with my own children, until I thought they got it.
I need to keep it short and simple. It's easier to understand. Students can only process so much information at one time.
If it didn't look like the student was listening to me, they weren't looking at me, it didn't look like they were listening, I just got louder and louder and louder.
I can be directive in a quiet, calm, confident tone. Yelling does not equal compliance. It just pushes the students' buttons.
You know what? I ignored all of the good behaviors because I just expected that they would act that way, so why should I recognize it?
I need to recognize little things when they're going well. I need to find the opportunities to praise those wins.
Sometimes I found myself just making mountains out of a molehill, to the point where I would just kind of lose it and have that emotional response. Sometimes the little things got my entire attention.
I need to set clear limits early. I need to use neutral or positive response to problem behaviors, even when it's really hard, and use my own coping skills to stay calm.
I just expect immediate cooperation. If I give a directive, I expect immediate response. If not, I'm just going to repeat the direction louder. Sometimes I might even use sarcasm. Sometimes I might get angry.
I need to give students time to process and start complying. That may take 5 to 10 seconds. I need to break tasks down so that students can understand them.
So we took this fall a discipline philosophy survey, and we are sharing the survey data with you. We're not going to read through it with you, we're just sharing it with you. One thing that we will say is that there seemed to be 157 secondary teachers took it, and there seemed to be a lot of interest in trying some new alternative methods to responding to our behavior problems, such as restorative justice, social suspensions, a reverse suspension, training in behavior skills. So again, the results are in your packet, and these are percentages, not number of people. Okay, so again, these are percentages. So the first column is whether or not the percent of people who thought a teacher should deal with it. The second column is whether a principal should deal with it, with a detention, a closed lunch, a Tuesday school. The third column is whether or not we believe the student should be suspended. And that kind of lumped in school and out of school together. So again, the results are in your packet. We're just going to talk about a couple of examples of restorative justice. Now, restorative justice doesn't mean there are no additional consequences issued. It could be that this is in lieu of a consequence, or it could be in combination with a consequence. It really depends on what the behavior is. So I just highlighted one in yellow. Let's say there's disruption in a classroom, traditional model, teacher detention. Maybe they went to the office. Now again, these are just examples. You could modify this to meet your needs. The restorative justice model, and a sincere apology to the teacher with a promise to contribute more positive in the future. Perhaps they spend a week helping the teacher with class cleanup. Another example, let's look at fighting, and it always depends on the situation. Traditional model is suspension. Now, we could either use, depending on the situation, a restorative approach or combine it. We could have them give a speech on how to negotiate using words. We could have them teach a class during a detention on how to manage their emotions. They could read a story called Boundaries for little kids and give an oral report. In other words, how can we get them to learn from their behavior so that they start to act differently? A social suspension is when we use that notion that some of the activities we have are a privilege and not a right, and we selectively choose when the student cannot participate. Now, it's not because we want to ding them or hurt them or make them suffer, but it's because we're going to try to use that time to debrief what happened and to teach a new skill. The goal was always to get them to re-engage at a later time. We don't want a student missing recess forever. We don't want a student missing every pep rally or every dance. So we're going to have to teach a skill and get them back involved. And then finally, reverse suspension. There are school districts that are doing this on a regular basis with a lot of success. I actually saw this happen at at Donnell, very successfully. It was an interesting experiment to change behavior. This is where the parent goes to school and they shadow their student, rather than the student going home. Now, of course you would want to be careful with this based upon the parent, what you know about the parent, the student, what you know about the student, the classrooms, there's lots of things to consider. But I did see it work. And let's think about it, which is the bigger deterrent? Going home where I get to play video games all day, or having to walk around all day with my parent as a shadow? Interesting concept.
So we know behaviors communicate something. They tell a story, and they're kind of a barometer of what's going on with the kids socially and what they're lacking as far as skills, or can tell us there may be some trauma going on. Our role as schools is to teach students how to manage those emotions and those behaviors and learn those appropriate interactions. So we have a lot of research that indicates that punishment and reward do little to create change in young children's behavior or academic performance. Maybe it's time we start looking at something else. Now, the things we're talking about, you guys are going to wrestle with. You're going to feel resistance to. You're going to have to, make it your own. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts of behavior management. So do remember that you're in charge. This is in no way, shape, or form saying that the adult in the room is not in charge. And it's about not getting into power struggles with students. So do not use the word try.
So don't use the word try. You don't want them to try, you want them to be on time. So we're going to eliminate the word try.
When you use a redirection, use start, not stop.
So a start redirection tells both. A start redirection tells them what you don't want them to do and what you want them to do.
So pick battles very carefully.
Ask yourself, if you pick a battle, are you willing to gain a compliance, regardless of how much energy and time of yours it takes? So we need to be very careful when we pick our battles. It can punish us too.
Do use a get ready to listen signal or gesture.
So you're going to use a gesture to show students that you're about to give some really important information, and you're going to speak in a normal voice. You don't want them to think they only need to listen when you get loud.
Do give a directive only once.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. I will only call on students who quietly raise their hand and wait and be called on. So again, we're giving the directive once, and we only acknowledge when they follow what we've done.
Do not give demands followed by a reason.
If necessary, give the reason before the demand. Now, you will probably have to take some time and reread these and let them digest a little bit. They're really important. Think about how this plays out in a classroom. So let's give an example. Let's say a student blurts something out. And we're conducting a lesson, the student doesn't raise his or her hand and disrupts everything. So depending upon the age and developmental level, I may point to a visual prompt on their desk to remind them not to shout out. Okay, we're going to have decided that signal together. I'm going to give less attention to what the student shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to pay attention to that. In other words, I'm going to pay attention to what I want. Sarah, eyes on me. I love how you're looking at me. I'm going to make sure that I point out what the student should be doing. If blurting out, only acknowledge the student when the hand is raised. If the student blurts out, I might have a signal where I point to my hand to remind the student to raise their hand. Now again, these are simple examples of how we can teach a student in advance our expectation and then follow through. So there have been lots and lots of lessons learned, and Ed mentioned one of those lessons learned. In general, this is a formula that we think we should use. When a student has some kind of an emotional concern in a classroom, we're going to have about 5 minutes to listen to what he or she has to say. Now again, this is an average. We're not saying start your clock and give 5 minutes. We're going to listen to what's going on. Then we're going to have a spot in the classroom that we have taught in advance for a student to go and just kind of do some deep breathing, get their stuff together. But they're still in the room, likely listening to you. So they're going to go to the R&R spot. If the student is okay to return, have a signal. They come back and sit down, ready to go. They never left your room. Now, all of this is with teaching in advance. So 5-minute trauma-informed response, 5-minute R&R spot. If that's not working after that amount of time, maybe they can go to a sensory room down the hall, or a counselor's office, or the main office. But again, all of this is with pre-preparation. So we're going to do an activity. In your packet, you are going to have a story called Brandy's Story. You're going to read the story, answer some questions in your group. Then you're going to read Brandy's history. Don't peek ahead. After you read Brandy's history, you're going to answer a couple of more questions. And again, all of this is in your handout. And we're going to give you 5 minutes.
I mean, that's pretty. Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, that's all right.
So guys, we have a break scheduled after this activity, so just so you know, it'll be a 5-minute break.
Oh, yeah, they have I'm surprised you even know. Yeah, you're right. Well, I feel the same. I feel good about
I could. If I hold my hand, I'd be out for a week.
Okay, we now have a scheduled 5-minute break, so we will come back. Be careful not to provoke students. We do not need to be the people who trigger the students. They have enough things going on in their lives. So our behavior influences theirs behaviors. We really don't want to let the students see us sweat. We want to, as much as possible, detach from the situation and stop thinking so much. Sometimes as educators, our mind just goes a mile a minute. We need to slow that down. And so we need to show students that no matter what they do, they're not going to make us sweat. We're not going to take it personally. And then later, go sharpen your saw. Go take care of yourself, because yes, it can push our buttons. So we need to respond to all behaviors with care. So there are signs and symptoms at each stage of what we're going to call an amygdala war. Let's just say the student's amygdala is triggered. So the amygdala is in the emotional part of the brain, okay? So anxiety or trigger, or a trigger. So if the student has that, then the educator, in that early stages of frustration, the educator is going to be supportive and non-judgmental. Escalation and defensiveness. So when the student moves further into that cycle, now they're defensive, I'm going to calmly set limits and give options. And the options I give are options that I approve. Student behavior. When the behavior starts to really increase, they were triggered, they escalate, now a behavior is coming out, we're going to use the least restrictive approach to handle the situation. De-escalation. Eventually, everybody de-escalates. Eventually, you release all this energy and you calm down. You might see a student crying, for example, or breathing, or they finally got to the stage where they can think. In that moment, we are going to work to reestablish the relationship. In this case, let's look at a verbal escalation. So the student challenges the teacher by questioning. So you know that student just kept asking me question after question after question. I need to consider that the student really does just want an answer. And then I need to calmly stick to the topic, offer choices and limits. So the student is refusing and is non-compliant.
Again, I'm not going to think too much. I'm going to ask myself, why is that? Why is the student refusing? What do they need? This is where we're going to take some of the other trainings that some of you may have participated in, and we are going to say something like, I care too much about you to argue. and then we're going to detach from the situation, which will shock the student a little bit. I care too much about you to argue.
So the student may have an outburst and have a release of emotion.
Depending upon the situation, I may actually allow that student to vent a little. Again, you're the teacher, you're in charge. You have to decide whether it's appropriate or not in that moment to allow some venting. If it's not the right time, make an appointment to listen to them later.
The student may use intimidation, but if it threatens the staff, then
if you ever really feel threatened, then make sure you get help. And again, there's always that de-escalation and release of energy. And you know when you've seen it. When you've seen kids really heightened and then all of a sudden it just looks like a balloon that's deflated and all that energy was released and they may cry. That would be one example of an emotional release. The other thing you're going to have to do on the spot is you're going to have to make a decision. What are the things you're going to ask yourself? You're going to assess the risk. How likely is this to have a huge impact? Ask yourself, how likely is this to have a huge impact? What is the risk of doing nothing compared to the risk of doing something? We have all been in those situations where we choose to ignore some things and we choose to address others. But we need to somehow have a plan on how we're going to figure that out. So when there's behavior, like some kind of a crisis, it could even be a medical crisis. We want to have teams ready. We want to be proactive and plan ahead. The goal is to respond with care and safety and to de-escalate. Just remember, we always make better decisions when we can think through it together. And I may be the first on the scene, but I may not be the leader because we need to figure out who's got the best relationship with that student to take over that lead role. Who's the most confident, who's the most competent to take over the lead role. And you know what? It really is okay to be flexible. It really is okay to be flexible. We don't need to be rigid. We don't want to create a lose-lose situation. And no matter what, we're going to maintain that professional control, even when we're challenged.
So let's take 1 minute and we want to have a silent reflection because we're looking at us. So what things and or students' behaviors trigger you? So go ahead and read through this stuff and we're going to take 1 minute. Okay, so we're going to go on that you've had a minute to reflect. We're going on to the next slide. So think of a challenging student situation that occurred in the past that pushed your buttons, triggered you, and your frustration was very likely visible to the student. So on the next 2 slides in your packet, they're called Calm the Storm. We want you to visualize that activity, and as you read through those next 2 slides, use that situation to lead you through those next 2 slides. And then, of course, the end goal is how will it cause your behavior to change in the future? So, as we're finishing up the reflection activity, we have a true or false. Apologizing to a young person reduces my authority. It gives away my power. It gives the youth power. Thumbs up, sideways, or down? Absolutely. Click, come. So, right. Apologizing is a way we build relationships with students. It creates a win-win, and then we're modeling that behavior for them. So apologizing is a great strategy we can use. It's always a good thing if it's genuine. If it's genuine. We really need to work on our PBS. One of the survey items that scored that we needed to work on this area, PBIS was probably the highest. That everybody reported that we need to beef that up. And so to beef up PBIS, we need to look at our Tier 1 supports. And we know that if we're trauma informed, we're working on different approaches so that we benefit all students, we benefit all staff with having really caring environments. We may not know the student's history. We do not need to know their ACE score to use this approach. Because trauma is so prevalent, just assume that if the student is having an emotional meltdown, it's probably due to some stressor or trigger or trauma that they've experienced. So once we have our Tier 1 down, then we're going to look at Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 2 may be skill building groups, and Tier 3 may be intensive one-on-one interventions or counseling. So with Tier 3, we're looking at building those relationships for those individual students. So a good strategy to use is check in and check out. Also, we had a student in the middle school. She taught us about sweets and sours when we did check in, check out. Sweets were, hey, what's going well? Instead of saying, what's going well, what's your sweets? Sours were things that were not going so well in her life. So, and using I statements can be very powerful. So instead of saying, what's wrong, you don't look very well, like, I'm concerned, tell me about what's going on today. Ways we can use I statements to not trigger students and build those relationships.
Our goal was to express genuine empathy in a short sentence. So how can we do that? Some examples of what's good versus what's not so good to express empathy. So some examples are, oh no, that must feel awful. I bet that feels terrible. I can't imagine how bad that feels. What we don't want to do is say, I know just how you feel. Because likely, we really don't know just how that student feels. So take 30 seconds, turn to your neighbor, and decide which of those examples you think you would use. And maybe you've got another one that you would use instead. But again, think about your short response to show empathy so that you're prepared to use it. 30 seconds.
I usually use those words. I have to say it. I'll just say it.
I'm so hungry.
So when we're working, we're ready to come back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're thinking about positive trauma-informed responses. We're doing that to avoid and to minimize or de-escalate situations with students.
So the following slides are going to contain sentences that support a win-win approach. Now, we're only going to say the sentence. Later on, you can take the packet and you can read the explanation as to why that sentence is effective. So the first one, we'll try again later.
The second one is, would you rather work on this after lunch or during 8th period?
Another example, I know you wish you could. Go to the restroom now, go to your locker now, whatever, fill in the blank. I know you wish you could.
That will not work for me.
Think of a solution that will work for both of us.
Can you live with that choice?
Request thinking. Say to the student something like, let's take a breath and think.
We need to do that if we want the student to get into the thinking part of their brain. So when you tell someone what to do, they are less likely to do it. Demands trigger power struggles. So we can say things like, what's next? So we can also practice and have really good reflecting skills with students when we're thinking about active listening. So we can actually reflect the feeling of what someone's saying and paraphrase that back to them. Or reflect the meaning of something to make sure we're understanding what they're truly saying to us. Or paraphrase with non-judgmental versions of facts and thoughts. And we have some examples for you there. This is an example table that we will use later when we practice the reflection of feelings and their meanings.
So let's try a situation. I'm going to be the student. Darlene's going to be the educator. So I'm Sarah. I was walking around outside before school started, not really doing anything, and Jessica, she just kept looking at me and she was whispering, and I know it was about me. I told her to shut up and she'd better watch her back. She got in my face, so I pushed her. She started crying, but I don't really care because she's so mean.
So Sarah, it felt like you were really angry when you thought of Jessica was talking about you, and then you pushed her. Is that what you meant? So at this point, I was reflecting the event and how she was feeling to make sure I was understanding her correctly. This is particularly important if you have students with disabilities or someone who's hearing impaired, by the way. Okay, so when we're assessing, does that student need some time and space to calm down so they can think about this before we move forward?
Now, we're not saying that the student doesn't go to the office later or doesn't have a meeting with an administrator later. We're not saying that there aren't consequences of some sort, whatever it is, restorative justice or a school traditional consequence. But the key there is that we started with reflection. We got to get the kid calmed down first. So we know that safety matters. Safety really matters.
So a script that can be used a lot, and you can insert a lot of different situations. I just used this the other day with the, helping a teacher with, but in this example, it's like, Sarah, this school is a safe place. I don't want anyone to push you, so I can't let you push anyone because this is a safe place. We all deserve to be safe in this school.
As a principal, I use this sentence all the time. Kids get it. So now we're going to have you try. This is a scenario that is, just pretend the student is sharing this situation with you. You're going to read it and you're going to try to figure out what your reflection is. You're going to try to paraphrase. And in your packet there is a chart that you can use that to kind of help you figure it out. So just take 2 minutes, read it, talk to your partners, try to see how you would paraphrase.
I'm serious. Historical content to do that? Yeah. That's the only thing that I got into. Oh my gosh. I don't remember. Like, I don't ever see and not for my seriously, I have like 20,000 emails. You can download it.
So Darlene and I were just talking about how this works so well in a marriage, being able to reflect things back to your partner. Women love this, by the way. This is a good thing for you guys to practice, and for us to practice too. Fathers with daughters too. Mothers with sons. Mothers with daughters. So we have some different ways that you can start your sentences. And again, you can kind of memorize the sentence start and let until it's natural to you. But you can start with something like, sounds like you felt blank when blank. Or let me see if I understood you. You felt blank because blank. Again, you just fill the blank with whatever the scenario is.
So by the way, a lot of that is counseling 101 when we went to school to be school counselors, those of us in the room. So another strategy is it's important to remember we have the authority, but we're still giving voice and choice to the students within the area that we want them to have that. So it's really important to remember that.
Ways to say no. Sometimes the words no and stop really trigger some of our kids. And remember, what we're really wanting is for them to learn and to comply so that they can access the curriculum. That's always our goal. So let's say you're going to do this instead of saying stop or no. First, take a deep breath and calm your own brain. Monitor your body language and your tone. Check you first. Then you're going to say, that doesn't work for us, but blank does. That does not work for us, blank does. Or, one option is to do this, or you can do this, but you're offering the two options. If they start to try to argue, you say, I care about you too much to argue. You pause, you repeat, and start it again. Don't let them suck you in.
So we can set limits and provide choices to the kids by using simple language and short sentences, allowing them to have time to think and get into the cortex, the thinking part of their brain. If they're in that emotional part, they're not going to be able to process. We need to consider what's enforceable when we're providing consequences or setting limits. Can we really follow through with this? And this is appropriate for what's going on. So we can provide non-punitive choices. We've already talked about getting choices. So take a second, or take a little bit of time here and write down 2 examples that you can use in the classroom during unstructured time to give students choices. We have 3 examples for you on the screen.
Okay, let's see how we do. On the Trojan.
True.
Oh my goodness. This would be really sad if this were a football game, if this were a Friday night. You guys can do so much better than that.
It is Monday morning.
It is Monday morning. I know I'm trying to still wake up somewhat too. Okay, let's talk about another strategy. Again, we have these strategies named on purpose because later you're going to practice them. So this one we're going to call the broken record technique. The broken record technique to avoid arguing. So you're going to focus on the goal. What is the behavior you want to see? Then you're going to very simply and calmly and clearly, very succinctly, state what it is you want them to do. Please, I need you to. Tone and body language means everything. If the student continues to do whatever they're doing, don't get sucked into the battle. What do we say? I care too much about you to argue. Then calmly paraphrase. You know what the kid is wanting to do that you don't want the child to do. I understand that you still want to talk to your friend. Regardless, I need you to turn to page 5. You're going to avoid getting emotionally charged, and you're going to repeat this like a broken record until you know it's time to just detach and walk away calmly. If you set the tone and you do this often enough, the kids will know they can't suck you into a battle, which is always our goal. So we're going to have a care-centered approach to how we respond to behaviors, and we're going to remember the whole child. We're going to think about whether they've had trauma, their academic health, their social-emotional health. We're going to take the whole student in mind.
So we need to consider 2 basic rules when we're doing this. We need to set firm but caring limits, and then we need to hand the problem back to the student, meaning maybe we pull them into the problem solving. And we need to neutralize the behavior. Again, delaying the consequences, and then going to that place in our brains we call the empty-headed response, where you're not thinking about anything. I care about you too much to argue. Stay in that neutral place. So when we delay the consequences, we need to not rush to react in the moment. We need to wait, create that space. That is the biggest takeaway for that slide. Create that space so that we're not reacting, we choose our response.
So the empty-headed short response, Darlene mentioned it a minute ago. We're going to really watch our nonverbals and our tone. We don't want to create fear. We don't want to trigger the student. That would be really counterproductive. The love and logic, the kid whisperer version of this, is, oh no, that's so sad. I'm going to have to do something about this later, but not now. Try not to worry about it. So in other words, the kid whisperer version of this is, I'm going to address this behavior later, but we're not going to interrupt my class to do it. I'm going to keep teaching. We'll come back to this later. RTIC add-on, oh no, this is not okay. I'm going to have to do something about this later, after we've both had time to think about this for a while. What you want the student to know is that you're giving space for them to think about what they did, and you're giving yourself space to think of a good solution. We don't want to rush to give a consequence that hurts everybody. Such as, if you don't do A, you're going to have lunch with me for the next week. You may not really want to have lunch with a student for the next week. So we're going to give you an acronym to remember, a 4-part response to behaviors. It's called CARE, C-A-R-E. C, always start your response with C. You're going to open and close your conversation with some kind of caring comment, and we'll give you an example of this later. Something that shows that you care.
A is you're going to you're going to access and have an action plan. You're assessing the situation and what the student needs.
You're going to make sure that you talk about the reward. Now, we prefer intrinsic more than extrinsic, but we're going to talk about the reward. What will the student get out of it if they're complying?
And the E is, what are our expectations? Are they realistic and are they achievable?
So here's an example.
So Maya is a student. Her behavior indicated that she did not respect others' space. She frequently touched or pushed others, and when she walked down the hall between classes, she had a lot of horseplay going on, and Maya did not keep her hands and feet to herself. classic consequences we're giving, such as that we took lunch away, there was extrinsic award when we took the lunches away, and eventually when we gave her that extrinsic award, she said, I don't like candy anymore. So those consequences were not working.
So now we're going to have a little role play. I'm going to be the adult, and Darlene is Maya, okay? So I'm going to say what I would say to Maya, and she's going to kind of think out loud. Okay, so you're going to hear what Maya's thinking in her head. So I want to start. Maya, I know you can be a good friend to your students in the hallway.
Wow, she's being caring, and she's listening to me.
Touching others and horse playing while walking down the hallway is causing some students to want to stay away. I know you want to walk down the hall with your friends.
She's paying attention to what I really want to do.
When I see that you respect everybody else's space by keeping your hands to yourself when you walk down the hallway.
So this is what she expects me to do?
You can walk down the hallway by yourself.
I would really like that. That's a good reward.
For now, I'm going to have you walk with me while you're coming up with a plan. Let me know when you're ready to share it with me. Then we'll see when you're ready to walk by yourself. I'm really excited to hear your plan.
Wow, she really cares about me and what happens to me. I think I can do this.
So again, everything has to be age appropriate, okay? When we wrote this, we were thinking 6th grade, 7th grade, middle school kid. Everything has to be relevant to that child. The language you use, you don't want it to seem phony, right? It has to come from you. So let's see what happens next. So I'm walking with Maya and I say, or I walked with Maya the next few days. My motivation was really to be helpful. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. And I reminded her of the reward, the benefit of walking by herself once she was able to come up with a plan.
And after she did that for a few days, I was ready to walk by myself and with my friends again.
So after she's told me that she wants to walk with her friends, I said, well, okay, what's your plan?
So I told her I brought one of these fidgets from home. When I walk down the hallway, it'll help me keep my hands to myself. I know I can only use it in the hallway, so I will have this fidget to help me keep my hands to myself.
So I'm going to respond to that. That sounds like a really good idea, Maya, but I want to problem solve. What are you going to do if you lose the fidget?
Well, I thought about that. If I lose it, I could borrow one from the counselor until I get another one.
And then I'm going to make sure that I follow up. How are we going to share this plan with everybody else? We don't want Maya getting in trouble for walking down the hall with a fidget when the rest of her teachers don't know about the plan. So we need to make sure that everyone knows the plan. And who should be telling the plan? The student. Who owns the problem? The student. Who solves the problem? The student. But again, we have some say in whether it's a good plan or not. So now we're going to, this is just really just a review slide for you so that you remember the 4 parts of the care. You don't need to go back and look for the slides. Here are the 4 parts.
So when we talk about motivation for students changing their behavior, we really want to focus on the intrinsic motivation because the extrinsic motivation takes a lot from us, right? We're constantly thinking of these rewards from them. We want that to come from within, and that's really what's going to help us develop our resilient, powerful students. So for Maya, her benefit was she was able to keep and make friends, she was able to walk by herself without an adult, and then she had pride and self-confidence in what she had learned by learning to manage her behavior.
So keep in mind, as the teacher, I would have never suggested that I want to walk with her until the problem is solved unless I'm really willing to do it. Because as soon as we offer a solution, if it's not something we want to do, then over time we start to get upset ourselves, and I'm sure the student's going to pick up on that. So it has to be something we're willing to do. Okay, we're going to have some fun. We're going to have a role play. While Darlene is passing out some role plays, I'm going to explain what we're going to do. We have done this with some other groups, and it is fun. You just have to be willing to go with the flow. We're going to ask you to, Rosanna, and Dan, do this. Have some fun. So this doesn't have to be great. You just have to create a 3-minute skit. And it's going to be the people at your table. So here's how this is going to go down. There are 3 versions of the skit, okay? 3 versions. We are going to randomly select which group goes up to show their skit. So you may not have to do anything at all, but you got to be prepared. So we're going to randomly call on you. At the top of the skit, there's going to be a description as to what the student's behavior is that it's a problem. What's the problem behavior? Then you as the teacher are going to use one of the strategies we talked about today to respond to the behavior. And we gave you the cheat sheet. All of the options are on the cheat sheet. Okay? So all of the options for the teacher to respond are there. So in your group, decide who's going to be the student who's having some behavior problems, who's going to be the teacher, and what are the other participants going to be? What is their role? Did everybody get a handout? Every table? Okay, so again, you're going to act that out. Who's the student, who's the teacher, and we will randomly call numbers to come up and show their skit. Do not say the answer to everybody, okay? Do not say the answer to everybody. See if they can guess. Just remember, your skit only has to be 1 minute long or less. It can be very short, 1 minute long or less.
Yeah, there you go.
I was just like, how did that help you? I mean, that opens it up a lot too. Yeah, Yeah, exactly. We're talking about the same thing. Okay, so we talk about what you did this the other day with meiosis. Coming together and crossing over. I didn't know that. I just popped my head. I was like, I said numbers. You did say
If you want to use a prop, you can use a prop. Again, 1 minute or less. We're going to call on you randomly. And up here is our stage.
They said we could set it. So we joined Okay, and Megan's gonna say.
And then you back from the
Okay, tables 1 to 7. Turn over your handout, and who's got the pink X? Tables 1 to 7, who's got the pink X? Someone should be raising their hand. Is there a table that has a pickaxe? Raise your hands if you're the table. Table 1 to 7. No pickaxe. All right, be courageous, people. Be courageous. I think it's on the back of the sheet.
So we're going to randomly pick table 5. Raise your hand if you're table 5.
Do you guys want to do it? Okay, they want to do it.
Let's come up and do the skit. Come on up.
Table 2, table 2, clap for table 2.
So this is Findlay City Schools Saturday Night Live version, right?
This is based on a true story.
I brought a union rep. Is this based on a true story?
It is.
Like you're the student.
Okay. And action. I want to sit up by my friend.
That's not gonna work for me.
You bitch. Oh.
Did you say what I think you just said?
I don't know. Why don't you repeat it back to me?
What I think I hear you saying is that you're upset right now. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I want to sit with my main bitch.
I respect you so much. Far too much to argue with you right now. So we'll talk about this.
We've got some actors and actresses amongst us.
Great scenario.
Okay, does anybody want to guess what they were portraying? What was the student doing? Now, tables 1 to 7 should know because they had the same skill, but
What did you say? What do you think they were acting out? What were some of the characteristics they were acting out?
maybe people that have that scenario can help with that. Table 2, help them out. The question was, what was the student's behavior that you were trying to portray? And she used some profanity, I heard some profanity, and she was being insubordinate. Okay, and so then we had the teacher use, I must say, a very, very caring and calm response. So we have the next group. This is hilarious. Tables 8 to 14, be courageous. Who's got a pink X? Tables 8 to 14. If
I think
nobody
it was
thinks.
Don Williams' table.
He stood up, we can tell. Then
Okay.
we'll need a volunteer.
Anybody want to volunteer to do their skit?
Do we have to pick? Now just remember, I really, really want you to use this as a thinkable moment. You know that we ask our students to do these things all the time, right? And you know they come with all kinds of baggage, and you know they feel like you do, right? So let's think about that. Who's going to be courageous and come up and share their skit? Doesn't have to be perfect. 8 to 14.
So table 2, pick a number between 8 and 14, please. 12, table 12, raise your hand.
Where's table 12? Table 12. Table 12. Here's table 12. Actors and actresses. Travelers are fun.
All right, so I didn't think it was going to be that fun today. So I see that you're pretty excited today, but we're going to need to leave that till later because we really need to get through this lesson right now.
Really uncomfortable right now.
Well, I can only see maybe some options we have here. You can stop laughing now, or maybe, we can come back later. We can talk about what you were joking okay with me too.
Yeah, I don't want to give up my free time. I'm okay.
Well, oh no, I need to see my cheat sheet here. No, seriously though, we need to talk about this later. I need to get on with the lesson, and parabolas are fun.
Okay. You win.
I really like the way that you went along with me. Great job.
Thank you for your consistency.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, I think it was kind of obvious what Tony was doing there. What behavior might that have been? What was he doing?
Outbursts, distracting, by way of laughing, right? Yeah.
Like laughing inappropriately at the wrong time when it wasn't really funny, but kind of laughing?
Okay, last section. Tables 15 through 22. Anybody want to claim the X?
Yay! We have a winner! Woo! Welcome them to the stage. And we're using props. I don't even understand why I have to read this. I don't even know English. How am I supposed to learn Latin? What?
So is there anything that you would like to discuss about this?
I don't know Latin.
Well, that's why you're here, is to learn it. That's why I'm here.
I just don't understand why I'm here. I don't even know English.
That's going to help you with your I understand you're feeling frustrated.
I am not an SNL actress. Sorry.
Is there anything I can do to help?
I don't know. Pick up my paper.
How about we come back and talk about this later?
Okay, whatever. That was actually really good, and I can see a student saying that, can't you? Absolutely. Is it easy? No. Do we need to change our approach based upon the kid and what we're doing in class, and who else is in there, and all of those million things you've got going on in your head to make a decision as to how you're going to respond? Yes, it's very challenging, there's no doubt about it. But we can do things differently.
So the next section we're going to talk about is when there's behaviors and we need to analyze those behaviors. So we're going to walk through those steps of analyzing the behaviors. The first thing we're going to do is define the problem behavior. And then we're going to identify the circumstances and where they're most likely and least likely to occur. And then we're going to use our best educated guess on the events or issues most likely to predict the problem behavior. So we're going to be like detectives trying to figure this out. And then we need to identify the consequences that maintain or reinforce the behavior so that it keeps occurring. So that's the first part of the behavioral analysis.
So the problem behavior can occur for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's just students making choices. Sometimes it's just teenagers being teenagers, right? But other times they're triggered, maybe it's a trauma, and those consequences, sometimes we inadvertently reinforce the behavior that we don't want. Sometimes our response reinforces that behavior. We need to think about it. Are we reinforcing the behavior we don't want to see?
So here are some examples of some precursor factors that may influence behaviors. For example, a student's history. And our history influencing how we interact with them. What's their developmental level? What's behind the behavior?
So when we write our behavior plans, and again, we can think about a behavior plan for any student, special education or not. We're going to think about the purpose of the behavior. What is the student trying to get? And we're going to make sure that we include every stakeholder in the plan so that everybody is aware of what's going on. We're going to think about what environments that plan is going to be implemented in. We're going to use our multi-lens so that we think about the whole student.
So when we think about changing a behavior, we have to remember we're going to replace a behavior with another behavior. It's just like us in our personal lives. If we decide to change a habit, we need to replace our behavior with another behavior. So this is a chart to help us understand the flow of a behavioral analysis. But what we really want to focus on is you have this problem behavior, and then the student's wanting one of two things. They're wanting to obtain or get something, or they want to escape or avoid something. So if we look at their behavior through those two benefits that they get, that'll help us with the beginning of a behavior analysis. So in addition to like those two needs, conflict can be diffused or avoided if students can communicate what they need. We put this list together so you can help the students identify what they're really needing under their behavior. Often they don't have the skills or the ability to do that, but we can walk them through that to help them become self-aware and then help them find the voice to really say what they need instead of expressing what they need through behaviors.
So there is an activity or a strategy that you can use to kind of get underneath of it. We'll just call it the 5 whys. So for example, Darlene, she's got a problem with speeding. Unfortunately, she got a speeding ticket. So Darlene, why did you get a speeding ticket?
Well, I was late for work.
Well, why were you late for work?
I woke up late.
Well, why did you wake up late?
Well, I went to bed really late.
Well, why did you go to bed so late?
There's this really cool Netflix series that I can't stop watching.
Well, why were you watching Netflix so late?
I use it to relax and de-stress.
So then we get to the bottom. Underneath of all of that, she's staying up really late so that she can de-stress. We have to figure out what the root is so that we can figure out a solution. What's the root?
So what we're going to do is you guys are going to practice this with a student, and you can come up with your own situation. We threw one up here. Homework is not completed. But at your table, take 1 minute to predict the 5 why, practice the 5 whys strategy. Remember, when we're doing this, we're focusing on the facts and the evidence. We're like detectives. We're taking all the subjective judgments and making stories about what could be going on and not making negative assumptions. So you have 1 minute to complete this activity.
The dog ate. Why did the dog eat? My mom lost her job in the dog house. We're making this up. Yes or no? Just do the rate or 0? I don't even do that. 20 different on the board of just give it to me later. Why does it get to players that are going to give it to me later? I mean, this is a real story. My biggest thing is
There's been so much I finally get in trouble.
because the data.
The most last
Yeah. Already done.
This was the main first order.
Yeah.
Very good emotional studies.
So, OH! Hey, that's better. Okay.
So now we're going to do kind of an end of the day activity before we have some thoughts and quotes at the end. We're going to read Justin's story, and instead of jigsawing it, we're just going to kind of do it as a big group. So we're not going to jigsaw, we're just going to do it as a group.
So, I'm going to read the story. It's all in your paper as well if you'd like to follow along. But Justin lives with his mother and father in an apartment. Justin does not have many friends and keeps to himself. He does not like other people getting in his space, touching his personal possessions, and may argue if an adult tells him what to do. If allowed to choose, Justin will work by himself. He appears to be frustrated when he has work in a group. Justin asks to leave the room to get materials in his locker or asks to go to the restroom. Justin's behaviors have been escalating recently. During group work, Justin will argue with peers and refuse to share group materials. This morning, during a science lab, Justin was arguing with a classmate, Chad, who had been hogging the lab equipment, and took Justin's pencil so that he could not record data on a chart. The teacher reminded Justin to keep his voice down and asked Chad to give the pencil back. Chad started laughing. Justin reached over and grabbed his pencil and pushed the data chart off the table. The teacher, who has worked hard to develop a relationship with Justin, walked over to the table and put his hand on Justin's shoulder. Justin jumped up, started yelling at the teacher, "Don't touch me," and walked out of the room.
So hopefully you can see that there's some realness in that scenario. So we're just going to take these slides and we're going to pretend we're going through a behavior analysis together. And again, we're going to make sure that we've got everybody, all the stakeholders part of this plan. So what brain state was that student in when that happened?
Was it in the emotional part or the thinking part?
Emotional part, in the limbic. Now, there are a lot of behavior concerns here. There's academic concerns that we can discuss. There's social emotional concerns that we can discuss, and there's probably even some executive functioning concerns that we can discuss as part of our behavior plan.
So is the student getting something or avoiding escaping something in this situation? Avoiding? Okay. What's under the behavior? What's the why? What do you think one of the whys could be?
And there were a lot of behaviors in that, weren't there?
Mm-hmm.
So you know we have to kind of pick which behavior we're going to focus on first to answer the questions, because there were actually multiple behaviors. What behavior do you think we would want to address first? It's not always an easy choice.
The response being touched? Okay, seemed like a big trigger. So we could focus on that first. Okay? So then we could ask ourselves, where do these behaviors typically occur?
In this case, the behavior happened in the lab, but it could happen in the hallway as a response to other students, especially if we see a pattern, right? Because that's what we're looking for, is what pattern behavior do we see? If that was the only time he reacted that way when being touched, maybe I wouldn't focus on that first. Maybe I would focus on the behavior that I think is my biggest, most frequent problem, but you need to pick which behavior you want to analyze.
And that's the behavior, the power of bringing the team together, because everyone observes the behavior in different areas.
So if multiple behaviors exist, just like we said, we need to pick which we're going to address first. And we have to, what's our best guess on the events that happened right before the behavior? What's the trigger? What happened right before it? And we're going to describe the desired replacement behavior. What do we want the replacement behavior to be? And we need to figure out, what are we willing to live with? What are we willing to accept? We may have our dream behavior, but what are we willing to accept?
So and then we're asking, what are the consequences that maintain or reinforce the negative behaviors? How will you prevent unintentional reinforcement of a problem behavior? And then we're going to, we can read that other stuff on our own, and then how will you reinforce the motivated desired behaviors? If needed, what are the natural and logical consequences to address the behaviors that impact the learning? How do we discipline with care?
A quick example of reinforcing negative behavior. I was just in a meeting where we came to the possible conclusion that if a student did none of his or her work in the classroom, the teacher would stay after to do the work after school. Inadvertently, we can reinforce, don't do it in class because I get your undivided attention after school and I really like it because mom and dad don't care about me. So we kind of need to figure out, how do we still give the kid what they need, but not reinforce the behavior that we don't want.
And some of the conversations with educators are like, I feel like I'm being punished then when I'm always staying after like that. People are willing to do it, but they have that perspective as well.
So then how will the setting be modified? How do we modify the setting to prevent the trigger? And what prevention strategies can we put in place? What can we put in place to proactively prevent it from happening again?
And then we identify the strengths and the resources, and we describe the skills that need to be taught using a proactive approach that we talked about earlier today to prevent future behavior concerns. Now, is this going to change overnight? No, it's this process we go through.
So we're going to look at the opportunities for the students to practice skills. It's not okay to just come up with the replacement behavior. We need to teach it, and then we need to find time for them to practice it until it feels more natural to the student. And we also need to make sure that there are safety strategies in place.
So here's an example of a flow chart that you could use as you're going through the process of a behavior analysis. And remember, we're focusing what is the student getting or what are they escaping or avoiding when we're asking these questions.
So here's an example of an answer for this particular scenario. And we're going to focus on the behavior of other students touching his things during group work and his refusal to share that equipment, right? He doesn't want to share anything. Don't touch my stuff. That was a big trigger. Typically when that would happen, the student would get verbally or physically aggressive. In this case, he grabbed a pencil and shoved the paper off. When that occurred, he would leave the room. The consequences of that are, of course, no learning is occurring, and he gets a lot of negative attention from the teacher. And the purpose of that behavior is that he really wants control. He wants control. He wants to keep his things to himself. And again, I'm trying to do my best guess as to what's underneath of that behavior. What was the purpose of it? Now, there's two acceptable behaviors that we're willing to live with. My preferred behavior is that he share everything willingly, that he shares with his classmates and he conducts his labs with no problems. That's what I would love for him to do. But you know what? I'm willing to accept teaching him to take turns. And I'm willing to accept that. Maybe he doesn't like it, but he'll cooperate.
For now, and then later we can go and address the next need. So we need to consider the following when we're evaluating our plans. Does the behavior plan indicate who's responsible for each action? Does the plan include communication with all the stakeholders, like the how and the whens? Are they connected to is our plan connected to a timeline? When will each piece be accomplished? Are deadlines set? So we need this evidence to help us go back and check in to see how we're doing, to see how we need to adjust to go forward, to help really change this behavior.
So we need to consider the following. We always need to debrief how we respond to behaviors. What went well? What could we have done differently as adults? So we need to debrief. We need to figure out how frequent are we going to meet to talk about our plan and how it's going. Then we need to revise the plan. And if we revise it, we need to make sure we tell everybody so everybody knows what the plan is going to be to help that student.
So we also need to keep good documentation on this, because if we're going into the RTI process, we go into the RTI process then with data for the RTI team if we're doing this outside the RTI process. So what you didn't know. Later in the day of the incident, the principal found out that the police had raided the house over the weekend and had arrested Justin's dad on drug charges. Justin's mom said they had to go stay with her sister for a few days. Justin didn't get much sleep because he had to sleep on the couch. He wasn't able to eat breakfast before going to school, and fortunately, Justin was able to ride the bus to school. However, when Chad was on the bus, someone grabbed the hat off his head that his dad had bought for him for Christmas. So when we're using a TIC lens, we need to use that lens regardless of knowing the trauma history of our students. We can assume that our students have some sort of trauma or stressors, and it's a possibility due to the prevalence of trauma that we know. We also have to weigh that, right, where sometimes kids are just being kids. We as educators have to figure that out.
So you know we're all in this together. So what we want you to do is we want you to say the word sometimes in front of each of these pictures, okay? So start it off by saying,
sometimes, help me out guys, sometimes, we're in the boat, some people are rowing, some people are complaining, some people are talking, some people aren't focused.
Sometimes it just, oh, thank you for doing that. Sometimes it just gets really, really rough and it feels like we're all by ourselves rowing alone.
Sometimes. We're rowing boats, but we're one in different directions. Some people are rowing one way, some people are rowing another. We're not really getting anywhere.
Ideally, we really row the boat together, all in the same direction, towards a common goal, so that we can create some synergy.
So what we know is all this work we're doing, our goal is to create resilient students. Students have grit and determination to overcome the adversities in their life. The research on resilience tells us for students at risk, sometimes they're doing well at age 18, 33% of the students are doing well. And then growth really occurs between the ages of 32 and 40, where 84% of the students are doing well. So sometimes our efforts, we don't get to see the fruit of our efforts, but we can trust that they're going to occur. So this is a video, a leader in me. Are we going? No, we don't have time. So what we're going to do, we packed a lot of stuff in this training in the TIC Findlay City School Cares. We're going to post this video and some other videos that we didn't have enough time to cover today, but they're really good because there are co-workers who have taken the time to do that, and we really appreciate that.
So, we need to follow this up with, we're mandated reporters. If we notice signs and symptoms that we think that the student is harming themselves or they're going to harm others, we're mandated reporters. The link to Children's Services is on here. And we have also created a draft copy of a reporting protocol. We will be creating a training for all of our classified employees. We'll share it with the certified too. And the purpose of the draft protocol is so that a classified employee can look at a situation and decide, is this, like what level is this? We kind of modeled it after our level 1, level 2, level 3. And so the classified employee can decide how to respond and who to report it to. So we're going to come up with a little training on that later this year.
So we need to practice confidentiality with all of the privacy of our students' information. So where are we having conversations about our students? Is it in a place that it's private for the families and the students, that other people cannot overhear what we're talking about? Because we want people to hear our private information about our families, right? So just being aware of that. So here's the goals of implementation for trauma-informed care. It's a review slide.
And we know we've learned a lot of lessons. Just keep in mind that as we approach spring and spring break, you may see some behaviors increase because of the stress of going on break. You may see increased behaviors during testing. And let's face it, as we approach spring, if we're running out of steam and we're adults, you can imagine that the kids are running out of steam too. So we need to take care of ourselves and take care of them.
And, practice ourselves, because as we're interacting with all of this stuff, we remember kindergarten cop, right? We can be traumatized by doing this work every day. So taking care of yourself and being aware of the signs and the symptoms of secondary trauma. So remember to sharpen your saw. And these are not words, like we really need to do that. This is not these things we just say. So we want to close with a story from my dad. So when I started doing this work for Findlay City Schools with trauma-informed care, I had a brother die by suicide in 2014. And then 3 months later, we said goodbye to my dad, who was 88 years old at the time. Now, my dad was a lifelong farmer. He raised 8 kids, and he had a lot of stories to tell about his life, about his 8 kids. Thankfully, we grew up and we matured. So during the time where he was getting ready to pass, I was able to spend a lot of time with he and my mom. And my dad was one of those guys, he never told a lot of private stories. But as he was entering, that last phase of his life, he told some really prevalent stories, some really moving stories. One, when he was in high school, he entered a classroom, and the teacher was not in the classroom. So he and a classmate played tic-tac-toe on the chalkboard, when they had chalkboards, until the teacher arrived. When the teacher arrived, my dad and his classmate were punished by hard spankings. Now my dad, who I ever saw cry one other time in his life when his brother died, as he told that story, he cried. He had tears running down his face, and I could sense his shame and his frustration about how that occurred. And he remembered that on his deathbed. So we as educators, we need to think about, after a life fully lived of 60 plus years, he remembered one of those stories to tell on his deathbed. So how are we treating one another? How are we treating our students? How are we treating our families? Because they will remember how we made them feel. So we want to close with a quote that Maya Angelou, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. We just really want to thank you for today. It's not easy to get up and present information to so many people you respect and look up to, and we know everybody's working hard every day, but you guys have really been a gracious audience. We thank you. Keep emailing us information, because we have people email us stuff all the time and we incorporate it. This was emailed to us by one of our staff, and we just really appreciate the information. So there's a reminder slide for you guys that the afternoon session will begin at 12. It begins with a Millstream tour. They're like, be there, be on time. Again, thank you very much and have a great Monday.